Long before time had a name, Toyota had a problem, and to some people, an advantage. You see, by 1999, the average age of an average Toyota consumer was about 60 to 50 years old. Now, Toyota didn't really like this. They wanted to get in on a younger audience. After all, these 50 to 60-year-olds are going to eventually pass away, and Toyota's consumer base will just vanish, and they're not going to attract new 50 to 60-year-olds without creating cars that appeal to them. The reason why your age base gets older and older and older is because Toyota attracted those customers with the Land Cruiser and Crown in the 60s. Now, by 1999, they were getting a little bit older, and Toyota wanted to bring in a new crop of Toyota buyers. Again, Toyota is kind of reaping the rewards of Scion nowadays. You watch the RAV4 commercials, shows the kid being tucked in the RAV4, now the kid has a RAV4 of his own. That's the ideal that Toyota wanted to promote. A brand, or at least some cars that would, swoop in people to buy Toyota and then eventually keep going with Toyota. You start with maybe a cheaper Yaris, move up to maybe a Corolla, Camry, sports car, then SUV or minivan when you have a family. That's what Toyota wanted, and Toyota didn't really eventually want to start their own brand. See, starting a brand is a big thing. They tried it with Lexus. It took years and years and years and years and years, and they really didn't want to cheap out, so they just wanted to start with some cars. Just some cars in the Toyota lineup that would be available to young people. So Toyota started on a new idea, or at least 3 new cars that would all be under one project name. This project name is called Toyota Project Genesis. Now, Project Genesis wasn't a name that was chosen for the public. It wouldn't be, I'm buying a Toyota Genesis, or anything like that, as Genesis was a name used by Nissan, not up until then. The idea wasn't that Genesis would be the name, but rather just the name of the project, or the concept, or the movement, I guess you could call it that Toyota was trying to start. In fact, the definition for the word Genesis is the origin or mode of formation of something. So they were trying to form some new, younger buyers. So let's look at the cars that they brought over and that they made specifically for the youth. And here's the formation of 3 cars that they decided to kind of pilot the idea. Now, I'll get into why they chose the cars that they chose in a minute, but it was the 1st generation Toyota Echo, the 3rd generation Toyota MR2 Spider, and the 7th generation Toyota Celica. Now, you have to understand that the 90s is a very different time than modern day. And hatchbacks were kind of the defining era of the 2000s and early 2010s, and sports cars were kind of the defining era of the late 90s and early 2000s. So it makes sense why they would lean kind of heavier on sports cars than sedans, even if it really wasn't that practical for the youth at the time. Now, the Toyota Echo here, which was the Toyota Yaris everywhere else, but they brought it over as the Echo. Some people will say it's for the weak Toyota minds. That's not why. It was actually for Project Genesis. They brought this over because this would be the car that young people would actually buy. If you're down in your luck, if you don't have a whole lot of money, and you just want a reliable car, it'd be the Toyota Echo. People love the Echo. People today swear by the Echo. They still drive the Echo. It was a fantastic car. It was very simple, and you could get it in a manual and an automatic, so it was very available to young drivers who weren't really sure how to drive stick. The MR2 Spider was kind of like a bridge between the Echo and what Toyota's trying to go for here is the classic ladder approach. So you start at the Echo, your first job. You make a little bit more money, you walk up to an MR2 Spider. Still has 4 lug nuts, still isn't that great. Basically just a souped up Echo. People that own that car are going to hate me, but that's essentially what it is. It's a small car. And then you climb up another rung of the ladder until you eventually get at the Celica. The issue here is that people grow up. I mean, a teenage boy might want this progression of cars, probably not the Echo. But eventually when he gets older, he's going to realize that the 2nd or 3rd car on that chain is probably going to be like a Highlander or a RAV4, probably not the MR2 Spider or the Celica. So while the progression didn't really make sense, the types of cars that they chose did make sense to the youth. Now, this is a fantastic example of where I think data could go wrong. At the time, teenage boys, this was more lean to teenage boys and teenage girls, but especially teenage boys, really like fast sports cars. So they were going to essentially make the most accessible Celica ever, the most affordable MR2 Spider ever, and the Echo to kind of, woo them in. And if those buyers stayed the same forever, this would have worked. But it didn't really. Another concept or idea that we have nowadays, because there is generally nothing documented about Project Genesis. It's hard to find documentation that's not that one, I think it was the New York Times article. What they were kind of trying to do is what I think they were trying to go for, is that teenagers would think that they'd go for the Echo, then the MR2 Spider, then the Celica, but really they'd go with the Echo, find the Echo, and then their parents would make them get something reasonable like a Corolla. I think that would be the actual progression, but I'm sure you can guess how this initial experiment went. Alright, and so here's a kind of weird table that I made, or at least AI made for me using the data that I made. I just feed it the data and then it makes a table for me with some notes and verdict. So essentially the Toyota Echo was one of the best sellers out of this group. If you look at numbers, it wasn't the best compared to the Celica, but if you look at the movement, it was the best, because the Celica, the sales flopped immediately after that, and then they didn't sell anymore, and the 7th gen was the last generation of Celica. But the Toyota Echo sold relatively well, except the Yaris, the successor in 2006, blew it out of the water. I mean, just absolutely blew it out of the water. And the previous year Tercel also blew the Echo out of the water, so it didn't really sell that great. In terms of the Celica, it sold better than the 6th generation, but there was essentially no huge, great successor. Now, the TC is essentially the Celica and the MR2 Spider's, successor. So for the MR2 Spider 7000, which is worse than the 2nd generation MR2 Celica's, starting year sales number, which isn't great. It was always kind of a niche car, but this was a bad start for a first year car like this that usually sold around 14,000 units, cutting that in half, and the Scion TC beat the crap out of both of them. So we can see that these cars just weren't really hitting the mark, and Toyota knew this. Like, they weren't bad performers, but compared to the other cars, for some reason, this strategy just wasn't working. So Toyota was going to come back, and they were going to hit the nail on the head, and they were going to do better next time. So the old failed Genesis project was led by James E. Press and Yashima Aniba, but now Toyota was starting the new idea, Project Exodus, the project that would eventually lead to the Scion brand. And right away, they started off with concept cars. Now, don't worry about the names of the cars that inspired them. There's an entire other thing we'll get into on the next little bit of this video that I'll talk to you about all that. Just look at the style. Look at what they were doing. First of all, we have the Scion the Scion XXB concept. It was blocky, it was squarey, it's the silver one at the bottom, and it had a big stereo in the trunk. Yes. Young people like that sort of thing. Then we have the weird roller skate looking high top car, the orange one. We can know that Scion was trying to find their design language. The idea for Scion was that they'd make a bunch of weird looking cars for North America. They'd give them different names like the Corolla Boxy or something, and then sell them worldwide in Japan as just... So, like, Toyota cars got a lot weirder under the Scion era because they were generating so many weird cars. Now, there were weird cars before the Scion era of Toyota, but this really led to a lot of weird options. Like the XB was sold as a Corolla in Japan. Like, there were a lot of weird cars in Japan, specifically due to Scions with weird names and wacky names and stuff. So the idea was essentially to make cars out of nothing, like the XB, like, it borrowed a lot of parts from the Camry. They would just make cars out of as little as they could without, taking or making new stuff, just more Toyota stuff, like engines, transmissions, specifically the powertrain. The only real unique bits were the outside and a little bit of the frame. They'd make cars like that, and then they'd sell them in Japan and other places to get their money's worth. So these were kind of the concepts that they had. I really like the Scion weird-looking one with the little divot in the middle. This is a very modern Prius-y styled car. If you look at my Prius video, you can find out that the reason why they were toying around with this style was because it was as efficient as a sedan, but utilizing the extra space. So I like how they were kind of utilizing that. But in the end, let's look at what becomes of the brokenhearted. What cars actually came out of these concept cars. Now that we've got a wacky look at some of the Scion, concept cars of the time. Alright, so the Scion BBX concept was, of course, the Scion XB. The Hako concept never became directly anything. Remember, these did influence Scion's design. They probably just, never went into production for very good reasons. The Scion Fuse concept, again, never became anything. But the FRS concept became the Scion FRS. Not shocking, that was actually the stock footage that we were watching earlier. The Scion CCX concept later became the Scion TC, and the Scion IQ concept later became the Scion IQ. So here you go. Let's meet the original cast of Scion, the original 3 cars that would take on the world. Alright, this is what I call the making stuff era. By this point, Toyota had finally got it through their noggins that people just wanted hatchbacks. They just wanted cars that were space efficient and big. So they made the XB. The XB was essentially designed to be as efficient as possible. Now, they went really boxy in the back, so in the front they had to go boxy too, but the idea was essentially the same or similar idea of the Prius. They just landed at different areas. How can we make the front as aerodynamic as possible and the back as efficient as possible? And the most efficient thing, at least if you're not counting aerodynamics, is a cube. There's no no, indentations. If you want to bow it out, you can just extend the box, and then it's even bigger than if you just bowed it out. So it's a very efficient shape, especially for the platform that it was built on. This was its own unique platform, which is kind of weird. The XA, which was extremely unpopular and killed off in 2006, it was a fine car, but not that great, really. The TC in 2005, this car was good. It was based on the Camry. It was essentially just a Camry, sport. It was a pretty good car. Can't complain. It was a great car. The steering wheels that they used, just generic Toyota bin parts. Some of these parts had already been used before in the Echo and stuff. Essentially, they were just cheaping out as much as they could for these cars, and absolutely, I do not blame them. So this was the first generation of Scion. This is what the world met Scion. If you wanted a bigger car, you got the XB. If you wanted a normal car, you got the XA. And if you wanted something sporty, you got the TC. Now, Scion's entire thing was like customization, not pre-built options. Like when you get an LE, they estimate what people want that would be spending in the price range of the LE trim of the Toyota Camry. In this case, they're like, no, there's one Scion XA, there's one Scion TC, there's one Scion XB, and you add on stuff from there. Now, these are pretty bare bones, and notice the Pioneer radio. This Pioneer stupid radio would be in every single Scion because it was like their brand image. It was the cheapest thing that they could do to unify the brand, aside from the white gauge cluster and some weird things in the steering wheel and stuff, and the overall general interior design. It was the biggest thing that they could do, essentially, for some odd reason, to keep the brand around. And as it got older, it got really tired. So just keep an eye on that radio, that Pioneer radio, because it's going to be everywhere. Now, this is when I feel like Scion was really getting into itself. This was like 2004 to 2010. Scion really knew what they were, or like 2016. This era lasted for a while. They figured out how to apply to young people, how to keep the brand alive, how to do brand unification, like, weird artwork that they spent some time on, the Pioneer radio, which was famous. Again, you're going to see that radio everywhere. They did things that teens actually liked, like the iPod integration. People love that. Regular Toyotas didn't have that. People love that, especially teens, so Toyota stuck with it, and they kept it. So that was pretty nice. It even had its own little Scion logo. That's a third generation iPod, and that's a pretty impressive kit for Toyota to actually think of. And teens, they were starting to get their emotional, their appeal to the brand. Someone gets a Scion, oh, that's pretty cool. Oh, it's as affordable as a Toyota. Oh, it's your first car. Oh, it's a brand new car. Wow, that's crazy. I'm going to buy mine. And that's how Toyota got Scion, got the wheels rolling. For Lexus, when Toyota tried to do a luxury brand, it took them like 20 years to get that brand off the ground. And it's still arguable whether they did a great job. For Scion, they got the ball rolling instantly, and as soon as they started feeling themselves, it was great. They figured it out. They knew what kind of brand they wanted Scion to be, and they just went from there and never looked back. Now, here we go. Here's the cast, and I'm so happy they finally, especially in 2008, they did a lot in 2008, and then in 2011 and 12, they finally got rid of that shit Scion interior design. I don't know what crack Toyota was smoking, but they finally realized that, you want to know what? Just because it's a Scion doesn't mean it has to suck, and we can actually make a decent car. So they actually gave us an interior worth liking, and they finally got rid of that Pioneer radio. Trust me, mate, she'll come back. Now, the Scion XB facelifted version. This was based on a whole different car than the first generation, which we'll get into later. The interior was great. It was nice, and it had some brand unification with itself. It wasn't just the same parts used over and over and over and over and over. This time, there was actually design elements that were repeated throughout the interior. Nice, good job. The Scion XA was unpopular. People hated the XA. It was seen as boring and bland. It had an underpowered engine. The ride and comfort were just terrible. People didn't like it, and it didn't really hit the young buyer vibe. So Toyota came out with the Scion XD. The Scion XD kind of played into its cheapness, but made it better. Better suspension, better ride, more comfortable seats, better interior that looked more normal and less space potato-y, which that interior design was, I'm not a fan of crazy interior design. Like, I wasn't a fan of the 2000s Honda interior design with the double hooded stuff and stuff. I didn't like that. But the Scion TC interior, I think, was really nice before with the little cover on it. Not stylistically, pretty harsh on the eyes, but design-wise, pretty good. The second generation, though, blows it out of the water. I thought this was one of the smoothest interiors Toyota ever made. It's very similar to the 90s Supras, actually. The IQ, pretty standard car. It was the Toyota IQ in other places, just this small little smart car competitor. And Toyota had finally figured it out. You have the IQ for children who just want cheap transportation. You have the TC for teenage boys and girls who want something really fun to ride around. And you have the XD for the average people who just walk up there and say they want a hatchback. And you have the XB, which is for actually serious adults and serious people looking for a serious car, but end up with a Scion. Look at the screen right now. This is the interior from a Scion IM. And you'll notice everything is Toyota. The climate control is off of a Prius. The radio, the shitty Pioneer radio, is the only thing from a Scion, which I'll talk about later. The gauge cluster is pretty standard. The steering wheel is from my RAV4. I have the same steering wheel in my RAV4. It's essentially just a Corolla hatchback. But it was a Scion exclusive, though, so that was pretty neat. But yeah, this is essentially what Toyota's going to do in 2016. So, up until 2016, things had been slowly dying off. And we'll get to when they died off and how they died off later. But essentially, all you need to know is that they were just dying off one by one, and all that was left was the TC. So they introduced a few new cars. Now here we go for the second part. The FRS was essentially just a Subaru BRZ, but Toyota-y. I appreciate that they didn't offer it as a Toyota, but again, comparing the FRS and the Subaru, with the FRS, you get a car that isn't much cheaper, with a shittier radio and a shittier steering wheel. Wow, I love that. The Scion IM was just a Corolla hatchback, which no one was really crazy about, and then the IA, I made a mistake. There's 2 pictures of the IA in there. It was just bland. It was a Mazda 2. It was a rebadged car, which I think is smart, because it doesn't look like a Toyota, because it looks like a Mazda. People saw through that. It didn't really sell great, but it was a good car. But a good car and a car that sell well are not great. So that's kind of look at the obituary. They were also selling the TC right up until the end, but that didn't get carried over, even though that was arguably Scion's best car. Toyota did try, though. They generated this new car. It was going to be great. It was going to be a hatchback. It would have 4 doors, although it would look like a coupe. It would be SUV-ish. People were going to love it. And they killed off Scion before it ever got his Scion badge. So now we know this car is the Toyota CHR when it was originally intended as a Scion CHR. Look up the Scion CHR. It was a concept car, but when Scion went underboard and it was sure that they would, they just changed that Scion logo to a Toyota logo and said, it's the Toyota CHR. And that was kind of what killed Scion, period. So what killed Scion? Well, this image alone that I've conjured up just killed Scion. We have the Scion FRS and the Toyota GR86. Tell me a difference. The grill's a little bit different. Wow. We have the Scion IM and the Toyota Corolla IM, which is the Corolla hatchback, and they renamed it to that and gave it a facelift. Wow, they're so different. And then the Scion IM and the RSIA. Sorry, I even confused the names. These cars were boring, and the issue was when Scion died, they just put a Toyota emblem on them, and the worst part was, you couldn't even tell. I bet people that bought a Toyota RSIA never even thought about Scion once, and that's what killed Scion. Why have a Scion brand if you can take every Scion and put a Toyota logo on it? And you may say, well, that worked for all the Scions because they had Toyota styling. Well, to that I say, does this image look normal? No, this is a Toyota Corolla Rumion. Remember when I said that all the Scions were just turned into Toyotas overseas? This is an example of that. It's just a Scion XB with a Toyota logo on it. Oh, also, the logo looked different. I said I'm an ape. The logo looks different because in Japan, every single logo has their own, every single car has its own logo, so the Corolla has a stylized C, even though it kind of looks like Dacia or Daihatsu. Anyway, so that's what it is. It's a Toyota. If this had a Toyota badge on it, would you buy it? Probably, but it's weird. I mean, it doesn't really look like a Toyota. The original Scions had character, and they look off when a Toyota badge is placed on them. But the new Scion? Toyota just started milking Scion, and the worst part was all of these cars were out for literally almost like a year. The Scion IM was introduced in 2016 and then killed in 2016. The Scion IA was introduced in 2016 and killed in 2016. The BRZ got to stay around for like 3 years and then it just died. And when they swapped them over to Toyota, no one batted an eye. And that's what killed Scion. Toyota just decided, well, Scion is Toyota now. And all the buyers went, okay, I guess Scion is Toyota now. And they just bought the Toyotas. I mean, if they could do that, again, my point is, if they could badge swap the cars without changing the styling, changing anything, the wheels, nothing, and it would look and fit into Toyota's lineup perfectly, that's your problem. That's the issue right there. Now, the TC was also being sold at the same time, but they didn't bring that over because, again, that was just a car that just wasn't a straight. The Mazda! I forgot. They had a Mazda. They had a Mazda rebadged as a Scion, and yet the Mazda looked better as a Toyota than it did as a Scion. How? Alright, and here we have the chart. This is just when they went into production and when they ceased production and the generations and everything. And a relationship, how similar they are. Yeah, the Toyota ist. You can tell when they started getting a little bit weird. Like the ist. Have you ever heard of the ist or the Toyota BB or the Toyota Corolla Rumion or the Toyota ist again, even though they're based on the same model, or the IQ? Not really. The IQ maybe, but those cars don't really sound like Toyotas. You know, they sound kind of weird, especially if you're an American. Especially only if you're an American. If you live in Japan, these probably sound normal. But the Toyota 86, the Toyota Auris, the Mazda 2, the Toyota RS is just a name for a Toyota Corolla. I mean, so the Toyota Corolla, the Toyota 86, and the Mazda 2. Those are all 3 cars that I could list just naming off Toyotas. Even though the Mazda 2, it's a direct rebadge, whatever. They're essentially all Toyotas, all of them. So you can tell going down on the based equivalent model that you can just tell, when the shit starts to hit the fan. So let's look at sales, shall we? Flashbang! Alright, here we are. Let's just look at the sales here. So ignore the IA and the IM sales in 2015. They were introduced in 2015, sold for not that long. But the sales, were pretty okay. The IM didn't sell that well. The Corolla IM sold significantly more when it was a Toyota. The IA sold significantly more when it was a Toyota. The 86 sold significantly more when it was a Toyota. So you can always tell, these cars sold much better as Toyotas than they did as Scions. And that was just a reality that Toyota created for themselves. The TC sold pretty well right up until the end, especially in 2017. Sold pretty well, up until the end, and then 9,000 started to die off, and you can just see the sales numbers here just were not good. The IQ sold 6, and the XD sold 9. Now, these were officially canceled in 2016, so that makes sense why they didn't sell barely any, but still, 794, that's pathetic. Those are terrible sales numbers, and the only reason why we have that 9 and that 6 is, the reason why we have Dodge Darts being sold in 2025, even though they were discontinued, a decade ago, because they just don't sell. They just sit on the lot, and they just don't sell. So, that's kind of what killed Scion. Now moving on to how I would bring Scion back, and I am convinced that we need Scion more than ever. So what did Scion go for originally as their main car, or at least in the first 2 sections of the video? Hatchbacks. Hatchbacks were the seller. They were popular, and really it was more sedans, but hatchbacks were also tolerable. And Scion was different. They didn't want to be the top seller, but they wanted to be, right up close, as close as they could get without seeming like a Toyota. Now, I suggest for modern day Scion, why don't we make it an SUV brand? Scion has always been about appealing to the youth. The youth want cheap, small SUVs. Scion could easily be the company to provide those cheap, small SUVs. Now, I'm going to propose 8 vehicles. Toyota, just let me introduce the series to you. Another thing that I've solved is the brand confusion. No one could understand what Scions were. The XD versus the XA. The XA was smaller than the XB. Why? Because you'd think the A would be bigger, so it'd be the biggest. What? Let me introduce to you my new naming scheme. So you have your Scion X series. This is the SUVs. You got your XA, your XB, and your XD. You've got all the cars that you could possibly want here. And really, it's a good series. We'll get into what cars these are actually based off of, I'm sure you can tell, but we'll get into that in a second. And then you have the Scion I-Series. The I-Series is the hatchbacks. People love SUVs, but if a hatchback is cheaper, they'll go for whichever one they can afford. And I firmly believe that the I-Series, while it may not sell as well as the X-Series, would sell good enough to justify its own existence. Now, we'll get into that in a second. And there's 2 other mysteries, but let's get into the X-Series and what cars those are based off of. Alright, well, here we are. So for the XA, I propose the Toyota Raze. The Toyota Raze is a partnership between Toyota, Subaru, and Daihatsu. They each make some bits of it. It comes together and it's sold as the Toyota Raze, the Subaru Raze, and the Daihatsu Raze, depending on which region you're in. And the Subaru, there's a weird name for it. So bringing this to the United States would be beneficial because Subaru could use it if they wanted it. Toyota could use it for Scion and it wouldn't have to be a Toyota. And that's the other great part of Scion. It eats up all the crap. It's like the filter. Toyota, if it's going to appeal to old people and it's going to lock in to appealing to old people, which is what Scion helped Toyota be boring, which is what we need since we're having the fires and everything. Bring Scion back. Let it accept all this shit with its mouth wide open, and let the Toyota brand be regal and for the cars that have only been tested. Instead of launching new cars like the GR Corolla and stuff, leave that for Scion. The XB would be based off the Toyota I always say it wrong. Senta. I always say Santa. The Senta. The Senta is essentially a minivan. It's like the Kangaroo, if you know what I'm talking about, the Renault Kangaroo. It's a good car. Also, you may be asking, did I use AI to render these images? I'm just a team of one person, man. Okay, I do not make nearly enough from this YouTube channel, if at all, some months, to hire an artist. Okay, so cut me some slack, please. And I also didn't say, ChatGPT, tell me what the Scion XB should be. I thought about these with my own car knowledge and generated them. And I would say that the XB should be based off of, the XD should be based off of the Toyota Corolla Cross. This is a winning lineup. It was with some SUV styling. These would sell incredibly well. We also have to be picky. We can't use up all the the Toyotas because, or at least all the North American Toyotas, because then people are going to catch on real quick. Alright, so here's the cars that I propose. So for the Scion IQ, the IQ missed in America because it only had 2 doors and it wasn't really a great car. I'm saying we either use the Toyota Pixis Epic, which is sold in Japan, and about the entire tariffs thing, Toyota's an American company. They could easily throw their weight around with the president. Trust me, they could get around them faster than a drunk gets around, a no more drinks limit. Just go to a different bar. Just talk to him, sit down, say we won't make EVs, and then boom, the cars go in. The IQ, make it bigger, make it have 4 doors, and Americans would snatch it up, especially if you have an EV version. That would be a car I'd be excited to see. The IO. Listen, the IA never really sold well. The IA name doesn't have any brand association, and if anything, it's a negative connotation because it was also used as a Toyota. That's another thing. We cannot reuse IA. We can reuse IM, but not IA, because IA was just... It's too much associated with Toyota. We do not want to be Toyota Light. We cannot be Toyota Light. That is what killed Scion. They were just Toyota, but light. They were Diet Pepsi. We don't want to be Diet Toyota. We want to be our own brand. We cannot reuse the IA name. Now, why are we reusing the IM name? Because people actually like the Corolla IM. People actually remember the Scion IM. People actually like that car. So bringing that back would be useful. And, the Toyota Aqua, which is essentially the Prius C, but they continued making it. Great. Fantastic vehicle. Bring that hybrid. Fantastic. Bring some hybridness to the lineup. The IM, just the Corolla hatchback. Great. Maybe do a little bit more styling changes. That'd be fantastic. Love it. And now for the last 2 illustrious vehicles. What would you make them? And now let's find out what I made them. The Scion FRS would come back as a rally tourer. Scion needs something. If it's just going to be Toyota Light, which, the Scion FRS is a very Toyota Light car, then it needs to have something. So making it a grand off-road tourer rally car would be like the ultimate revenge for the original boring Scion FRS. And taking the Toyota CHR, the modern EV that sucks, and renaming it the TC, giving it some coupe styling, people would buy that up, and it could be the peak of the Scion lineup. The most luxurious, the most expensive, the most EVE, and the most powerful. So let me know what you think of my reimagined Scion brand. Let me know how you would reimagine Scion. Let me know if you think we should bring Scion back. Let me know your favorite Scion fact. I know I'm saying a lot. This sounds like I'm begging for comments here. I'm just trying to get the ball rolling. Okay? I love discussion. This channel is all about discussion. So, thank you for watching. Don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe. And I hope I see you all real soon.